In 2006, a 23-year-old woman was in a car crash. She survived, but stopped responding, eyes open, no movement, no speech. For 5 months, doctors wrote persistent vegetative state on her chart. They told her family there was nothing left, no one was home. Then a neuroscientist named Adrian Owen put her in an fMRI scanner. He said, "Imagine playing tennis." Something extraordinary happened. Her brain lit up. The motor cortex, the part that plans movement, activated exactly the way it does in a fully healthy person, imagining the same thing. She was in there, completely aware, completely trapped. For 5 months, she had heard everything, the doctors giving up, the family crying at her bedside, and she could not move a single muscle to tell them she was still there. That discovery changed neuroscience forever. It also raised a question no one wanted to ask. How many of the people we've written off as gone are still inside, fully conscious, waiting for us to notice? The question of what consciousness is and where it lives has been called the last great mystery of science. It's the thing that makes you, you, the voice in your head reading these words right now. But for most of the 20th century, neuroscience treated consciousness like an embarrassing relative, something too subjective, too messy, too philosophical to study seriously. Real science was about neurons firing, synapses connecting, action potentials propagating. Consciousness. That was for poets. That changed around 2010, and what researchers have found since then is not just surprising, it's unsettling. Here's the claim that's emerging from the best labs in the world. Consciousness might not be produced by your brain at all. Your brain might be more like an antenna, receiving, filtering, and constraining a field of awareness that exists independently of it. And I know how that sounds. It sounds like mysticism. It sounds like something you'd hear at a California retreat with crystals and chanting. But this idea is now being taken seriously by neuroscientists at places like Harvard, Caltech, and University College London. Not because they've gone soft, because the data is forcing their hand. As neuroscientist Christoph Koch, who spent 25 years trying to find the neural correlates of consciousness, put it, "I used to believe consciousness emerges from complex computation in the cerebral cortex. I no longer believe that. The evidence points elsewhere. Let me walk you through the case that's dismantling the brain produces consciousness model, piece by piece. Because when you stack these findings together, something remarkable happens. The conventional view doesn't just develop cracks, it shatters. First, terminal lucidity. This is a documented phenomenon where people with severe long-term dementia, Alzheimer's patients who haven't recognized their own children in years, suddenly, hours or even minutes before death, become completely lucid. They recognize everyone. They have coherent conversations. They remember things they had no biological right to remember. And then they die. Consider the case of Anna, an 82-year-old woman in a care home in Munich. Advanced Alzheimer's, 10 years without recognizing her daughter. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon, she sat up in bed, looked directly at her daughter and said, "You've been so patient with me. I know I've been difficult, but I've been here the whole time." She named all 4 grandchildren, asked about each one specifically, including the youngest, who had been born long after her diagnosis. She recalled details of her daughter's wedding from 40 years earlier that no one had mentioned in decades. 20 minutes later, she was gone. The autopsy showed a brain that, by any materialist measure, should not have been capable of a 5-minute conversation, let alone that conversation. A 2024 systematic review in the archives of gerontology examined 83 documented cases. These were not anecdotes. These were clinical observations by multiple witnesses, doctors, nurses, family members, describing the same impossible thing. A brain ravaged by amyloid plaques and tau tangles, with cortical tissue literally shrunken and destroyed, briefly producing the kind of clarity it hadn't achieved in a decade. If consciousness is simply what the brain does, if a damaged brain equals a damaged mind, terminal lucidity should not exist. It's like a smashed radio, suddenly playing a crystal-clear symphony for 30 seconds before going silent forever. Which brings us to the radio analogy, and why it's not as crazy as it sounds. If your brain were a radio and consciousness were the music, damaging the radio would distort the music, but it wouldn't destroy the broadcast signal. The signal is still there. The radio just can't play it anymore. In this analogy, terminal lucidity is the broken radio briefly, impossibly, finding the signal again before its circuits fail for good. It should not be possible, and yet it keeps happening. Second, near-death experiences, or NDEs. And before you roll your eyes, I know the skeptical reflex, oxygen deprivation, hallucinations, the brain's final fireworks. I held that view myself, but the data has become extremely difficult to dismiss. In the AWARE-2 study, published in 2023, researchers placed images on shelves facing the ceiling in resuscitation rooms, visible only from above. Of the 28 cardiac arrest survivors who reported veridical perceptions during flat EEG periods, 2 accurately described images they could not have seen from their physical position. One described the specific pattern of stickers on the defibrillator machine, including a manufacturing label on the top surface that no one in the room had consciously noticed. Think about that. Flat EEG means no organized brain activity. No brain activity means, by the standard model, no consciousness, no awareness, nothing. And yet, here were verifiable observations from that state, not vague feelings of peace or tunnel of light experiences that could be explained by oxygen deprivation. Specific, testable, independently verified observations about physical objects in a physical room. The lead researcher, Dr. Sam Parnia of NYU, called the findings a paradox that the current neuroscientific paradigm cannot explain. That's scientist speak for everything we thought we knew is wrong. The third phenomenon is the hardest one to explain away, and it's the one that turned me from a skeptic into someone who thinks the antenna model deserves serious attention: psychedelic neuroscience. In 2022, researchers at Imperial College London gave volunteers psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, and scanned their brains with fMRI. What they found was the opposite of what the brain as computer model would predict. Instead of increased activity, instead of the drug turning on new regions, psilocybin massively decreased brain activity, especially in the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with ego, self-narrative, and filtering of information. The result? The most profound experiences of the volunteers' lives. Mystical experiences, encounters with entities, a sense of cosmic unity that they rated as more meaningful than the birth of their first child. 5 years later, in follow-up studies, over 60% of participants still ranked their psilocybin session among the top 5 most meaningful experiences of their entire lives. Not top 5 drug experiences, top 5 experiences. Period. On less brain activity. This is the part that breaks the standard model. If more consciousness equals more brain activity, then less brain activity should equal less consciousness. But psilocybin produces the opposite. It reduces the brain's filtering, like opening the aperture on a camera, and lets in more. The neuroscientist Robin Carhart-Harris, who led the Imperial studies, described the brain as a reducing valve, a constraining mechanism that filters out most of reality, giving us just the narrow slice we need to survive. Under psychedelics, the valve relaxes, and the experience is not chaos. It's profound meaning. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night about this. The default mode network that gets suppressed under psilocybin is the same network that's hyperactive in depression, anxiety, and obsessive rumination. The part of your brain that generates your sense of being a separate self. The you that worries about the future, regrets the past, compares yourself to others. That's the default mode network. And when it quiets down, something remarkable happens. People don't become less conscious. They become more conscious. They report feeling more connected, more present, more real than they've ever felt. As one participant put it, it felt like I had been looking at the world through a letterbox my entire life, and suddenly someone opened the door. This aligns eerily well with what philosophers like Aldous Huxley proposed 70 years ago in The Doors of Perception, that the brain's primary function is eliminative, not productive. It filters, constrains, and reduces consciousness to a manageable trickle. When the filter fails, through psychedelics, meditation, near-death states, or terminal lucidity, something larger pours through. So let's put this together. You have terminal lucidity, destroyed brains briefly producing crystal-clear consciousness. You have verified perception during flat EEG cardiac arrest, awareness without brain activity. You have psychedelics producing the most profound conscious experiences of a lifetime on reduced, not increased, brain metabolism. You have the hard problem of consciousness, the fact that we still cannot explain how physical neurons firing produces subjective experience. A problem so stubborn that philosopher David Chalmers has called it the hard problem for 30 years without anyone coming close to solving it. And then there's the final piece. In 2023, a team led by Stuart Hameroff at the University of Arizona published findings suggesting that consciousness operates at the level of quantum processes inside neuronal microtubules, tiny protein structures inside brain cells. The key finding: anesthetic gases bind to these microtubules and disrupt quantum coherence. When the quantum coherence stops, consciousness disappears. When the anesthetic wears off and coherence resumes, consciousness returns. If consciousness were simply classical computation, neurons firing, anesthetics should just slow it down, not switch it off entirely. But that's exactly what they do. They flip a quantum switch. This is not fringe. Hameroff's collaborator in developing this theory was Sir Roger Penrose, one of the most decorated physicists alive, a man who shared the Nobel Prize for proving that black holes are real predictions of general relativity. Their hypothesis, called orchestrated objective reduction, or ORC-OR, proposes that consciousness is a fundamental property of the universe, like gravity or electromagnetism, and that brains evolved to access it, not create it. In this model, your brain is a quantum antenna. When the antenna is damaged, tuned differently, or briefly shut off, the signal changes, but the field is always there. Now, is OR proven? No. Far from it. There are serious critics who point out that quantum coherence in the warm, wet environment of the brain should decohere far too quickly to support conscious processing. The theory might be wrong in its specifics, but here's what's significant. A Nobel laureate in physics and a respected anesthesiologist are proposing in peer-reviewed journals that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but accessed by it. 20 years ago, this idea would have been career suicide. Today, it's a live hypothesis being debated in the pages of Nature and Science. That shift alone tells you how much the ground has moved. Here's my opinion, and you've earned it by staying with me this far. The standard materialist model of consciousness, the one that says you are nothing but your brain, that your entire inner life is an illusion produced by meat, is dying. Not because of philosophy, not because of wishful thinking, because the data points somewhere else, and scientists who were once its fiercest defenders are now the ones leading the retreat. I'm not telling you that souls exist, or that consciousness is magic, or that we should replace neuroscience with spirituality. What I'm telling you is that the question of what you are is more open right now than it has been in 300 years. The worst thing you can do is accept a lazy answer. Whether that's, you're just neurons firing, or it's all a mystery and we can't know. Both of those are cop-outs. Both of those let you stop thinking. And this is the one question you cannot afford to stop thinking about, because it's the only question where the answer changes everything about how you live. What the data is telling us, from fMRI scans of vegetative patients who imagined tennis, from people who accurately described objects during cardiac arrest, from terminal lucidity, from psilocybin, from quantum microtubules, is that consciousness is bigger than the brain. The brain shapes it, filters it, constrains it, but it does not generate it. And here's what this means for you, concretely. You are not your brain. You are not your thoughts. You are not the voice in your head reading these words. You are something that experiences those things. Something that was here before this sentence and will still be here after it ends. What that something is, and what happens to it when the brain's filtering stops for good, is the most important question you will ever live with. Next week, we're going deeper, literally. We're going to the bottom of the ocean, where the pressure would crush you in less than a second, and where scientists have found something that shouldn't exist. Life without sunlight, life without oxygen, life that rewrites the rules of biology. You are not going to believe what's down there.